Discover the incredible moment when 5 officers realize the man they confronted is their new chief. Jake's heart raced as he drove home, the worn-out engine of his truck humming a familiar tune against the backdrop of a fading twilight. After a long day at the garage, he was exhausted but filled with gratitude. The oil-stained hands that fixed engines did not allow for luxury, but they held the strength of hard work and determination. This small Midwestern town, with its patched sidewalks and cheerful porch lights, reflected the resilience Jake knew well. It was where his single mom had sacrificed everything to raise him and his younger sister, Emily, battling through the everyday struggles life threw their way. But tonight was different. As he turned down a darkened street, 5 police cars suddenly swarmed him with their lights flashing like angry fireflies. Jake's stomach sank. The officers approached, their silhouettes framed against the glaring headlights. A rush of anxiety gripped him. Drawing on the calm he'd built up in military service. "Stay cool," he whispered to himself. But the words felt brittle as accusations flew through the night air like sharp daggers, suspicions of suspicious behavior. "Step out of the vehicle," barked one officer, an edge in his voice that cut deeper than intended. The others flanked him, creating a bubble of tension. Jake clenched his fists, but he fought against the urge to defend himself, knowing that shouting would only add fuel to the fire. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said, his tone steady, reminiscent of the leadership he'd carved out of chaos overseas. Then came an unexpected twist. The crackle of the police radio rang through the thick silence. "All units," a voice called out, "the new chief is arriving in town." The officers' faces twisted in confusion, eyes darting between Jake and their radios. The realization hit like a lightning bolt. They were on the verge of confronting the man who would soon lead them. A palpable shift enveloped the air as they stepped back, their biases exposed under the glaring realization. Jake's cheeks flushed, more from the memories of his mother's hard work than the spotlight of suspicion. "This isn't how we solve problems," he said, his voice firm but gentle, each word dripping with the authenticity he wished they'd understood from the start. "Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." With the tension easing, Jake took a breath, squaring his shoulders. "We're all fighting the same battles," he continued, inviting connection rather than conflict. The officers glanced at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, and then back at Jake. They weren't just looking at a mechanic or a soldier. They were looking at someone who could rebuild the bridges scorched by misunderstanding. Could he challenge the ingrained prejudices, foster respect, and inspire genuine dialogue? As they stood on the precipice of a transformative moment, the shadows of judgment began to lift. Would Jake find a way to bridge the divide, to lead a town that needed unity but often chose division? The night stretched out, heavy with the promise of change. Hope danced along the edges of uncertainty, leaving everyone on edge. The question remained, could this mechanic, this veteran, this son of grit truly inspire them to create a brighter future? Or would the same prejudices that almost led to violence rear their ugly heads again? Jake's heart thudded in his chest, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. He scanned the faces of the officers, reading their surprise and shame. They stood before him, unsure of their place in this unexpected revelation. These were the same uniforms that roamed his childhood streets, but their faces had always been strangers. "Listen," Jake started, voice steady but laced with urgency. "I know feelings run deep in this town. I've seen it. Where I grew up, us versus them often felt like law. But it doesn't have to be that way." He stepped forward, hands open in front of him, showing he meant no harm. "We can stand together. Now's the time to choose a different path." The officers shifted. Some exchanged glances, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope. A few hesitated, caught between duty and the unspoken desire for change. One officer, Detective Miller, if Jake remembered correctly, nodded slowly. "You're right. This isn't how we want it to be," he said, his voice revealing a crack in the facade of authority. "But it's hard to let go of what we've always known." Jake took a moment, his own memories flashing before him. The dinner spent worrying about bills, Emily's laughter cutting through the stress. He thought of his mom, of how she taught him to find light in the darkest corners. Change is never easy, but maybe it starts here tonight. His heart swelled with the hope he sought to ignite. Another officer, younger with fresh eyes, hesitated, then spoke up. "How do we start? We've always been told to stay separate. That's what makes us safe." "Safe?" Jake echoed, shaking his head gently. "Safety doesn't come from walls. It comes from understanding, from reaching out. The trust we build will keep us safe, give us strength." The wind stirred, causing the silence to settle like a blanket over them. Every night he worked late. There were moments he thought about change but felt powerless. Now it felt like the universe was pulling together, aligning their paths in ways he never saw coming. "Okay," one of the older officers finally said, stepping to the forefront. "Let us talk. We've messed up. We can do better." The resolve in his voice resonated, and even the shadows seemed to lift a bit. Jake nodded, a flicker of relief passing through him. "That's a start. Let us meet. I want to hear your stories. This town, it needs to know that everyone belongs." As they agreed to talk again the next day, the tension eased further, replaced by the weight of anticipation. Maybe they could create a coalition, bridge the gaps that had opened over the years. Just as they were about to disperse, one officer raised a hand, pausing Jake in his tracks. "Wait, what's your plan as chief? What do you want us to do?" Jake took a deep breath, the nerves creeping back, but he faced them head-on, thinking of all the people in the town, families, friends, faces he recognized. "I want to listen first, to understand your experiences. Then we can set goals. Priorities, maybe." He chuckled lightly, shrugging as he added, "And I need you guys. We're all learning together." Murmurs spread between the officers, a mix of relief and uncertainty. As they drifted back to their cars, Jake stood, a rush of purpose surging through him. This was the beginning, but he knew change wouldn't come easy. As he watched them leave, doubt crept in, but so did hope. Could they truly mend the fractures? A path laid ahead, but would they walk it together? With one last glance at his reflection in the window of his truck, Jake whispered to himself, "Here's to building bridges," a resolve budding in his heart. And as he turned to drive home, the question lingered: how far would they all go to achieve the change they desperately wanted? The sun dipped lower as Jake drove home, the colors of dusk bleeding into one another, each shade whispering of old struggles and fresh beginnings. He gripped the steering wheel, still buzzing from the encounter. Hope flickered in his chest, but so did anxiety. What if tomorrow played out differently? What if those officers didn't show up? The thought was unsettling, gnawing at him like a persistent itch. Arriving at his small house, Jake noticed the porch light flickering. It felt like a welcome, despite the uncertainty looming over him. He stepped inside, the familiar sound of Emily's laughter echoing in the air. She was baking in the kitchen, the sweet smell of cookies filling the space. It was comforting the way the warm light wrapped around him, how it felt like coming home for the first time in ages. "Hey, Dad, want to help me decorate?" she called, flour dusting her cheeks and nose, giving her a youthful innocence that made Jake smile. "Of course," he replied, but then hesitated. "How was your day?" "It was good. Mrs. Jenkins said I did a great job on my report." She beamed, her pride lighting up the room. Jake ruffled her hair, a need to shield her from all the harshness outside, surfacing deep within him. "That's awesome, kiddo. But I've had a long day. Can I help you decorate after I catch my breath?" "Sure. Take your time." She skipped back to her work, leaving Jake standing in the doorway, feeling the split between his professional world and family life. Once in the quiet of his room, Jake sank onto the bed. He grabbed his phone, tapping a few messages from his childhood friends. They were sharing memories, reminding him of who he was before the badge. Laughter bubbled up as he read the jokes, nostalgia washing over him. It was good to remember, but with every chuckle came the weight of his new responsibility. He had to bridge those memories with the present. The next morning greeted him with a tense stillness. Jake took a deep breath, knowing the discussions ahead could redefine his vision of policing in the town. The clock ticked steadily, each second tightening his stomach. What they didn't trust him. It was one thing to talk about change in the dark of night. It was another to enact it when dawn broke. As he pulled up to the station, he noticed officers gathering outside, their faces lined with apprehension and curiosity. Detective Miller was there, looking more serious than Jake had seen him last night. His heart sank momentarily, wondering if this was a sign of doubt. "Morning, everyone," Jake called out as he climbed out, forcing a bright smile despite the tension knotting in his stomach. "Morning, Chief," came the chorus. A quick look around showed a mix of hesitant smiles and avoided eyes. It sent a chill down his spine. "Let us gather inside. I want to hear your stories, but I also want this to feel safe for all of us," Jake said, meaning every word. The S felt significant now. It wasn't just him anymore. It was about building that bridge together. As they moved into the station, Jake encouraged them to speak. And slowly, they began to share their experiences, stories filled with hurt, confusion, and yearning for something better. Each voice added layers, revealing the complex web of emotions that had built walls around them over the years. A while into their conversation, Jake couldn't ignore the undercurrent, the realization that he needed to connect with the community as much as with the officers before him. Just as he was about to pivot the discussion towards outreach, someone knocked at the door. All heads turned. The chapel of silence wrapped around them. Another officer stepped in, an uneasy expression forming on his face. "Chief, there has been an incident. You need to see this." Jake felt the room pulse with tension. The weight of unspoken dread sat heavy in the air. What awaited them outside could change everything they had just begun to build. "How serious?" Jake asked, forcing himself to keep his composure. "It could get messy," came the officer's terse reply, a full stop hanging ominously. Jake's heart raced at the uncertainty. Could they hold on to the hope of change in the face of chaos? As he prepared to step out, Jake felt the shared breath of his officers behind him, a mixture of fear and determination. Would they stand together, or would the walls they hoped to tear down rise again? This was the moment. Would they rise to the challenge or succumb to fear? Jake stepped into the harsh light outside, the air thick with the remnants of anxiety. The chatter from the officers quieted, replaced by nervous murmurs. He scanned the lot, noticing a cluster of squad cars parked haphazardly, their sirens silent, but their presence loud. A knot twisted in his stomach. "What's going on?" he asked, voice firm, yet edged with concern. "It's about a break-in over at Trudy's Market, Chief," Detective Miller replied, his face set like concrete. "We received reports of a suspect trying to make a getaway. We think they're still in the area." Every officer's expression reflected a mixture of urgency and dread. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The situation could quickly spiral out of control if they weren't careful. The community had only begun to trust him, and he could feel that fragile trust teetering on the edge of chaos. "All right, let us organize. I want everyone to be smart about this. No shortcuts. We need to keep our cool focus on the job," he instructed. He hoped his words anchored them, though he could see some still war expressions of doubt. "Do you want me to take the lead?" Detective Miller inquired, but Jake held up a hand. "No, I'm leading this one. It's time for them to see I mean what I say." The words felt heavy in his mouth, but he was resolved. He needed them to recognize that he wasn't just a badge. He was one of them, just as invested in the community's well-being. Jake gathered the officers around him. "Listen up. We'll split into teams. I want every angle of the market covered. We don't control the narrative if chaos refines it for us." He met their eyes, standing a little taller, trying to exude confidence. With a nod, the officers broke up, some heading to their vehicles, others checking their gear, determination overriding the fear that had lingered moments ago. Jake felt a rush of adrenaline course through him. This was the kind of teamwork he wanted to ignite shared responsibility, shared fears, and ultimately shared achievement. Within minutes, they were mobilizing, the sound of radios crackling to life, adding an electric buzz to the atmosphere. Jake climbed into the driver's seat of his cruiser while a storm of conversation crackled around him. He could taste the uncertainty, but it mixed with something more potent, an urgency for action. As they sped towards Trudy's Market, the streets blurred by in flashes of color. The officer next to him monitored the radio, eyes scanning for updates. Jake's thoughts raced faster than the car. What were they walking into? What if the situation was worse than anyone had anticipated? When they arrived, the market loomed ahead, the glow of its neon sign overshadowed by the flashing lights of their squad cars. The area fell off, an eerie quiet hanging in the air. The usual clamor of customers and activity was replaced by an unsettling stillness. Jake stepped out, heart pounding hard as they approached the entrance. "Miller, take the left side. I'll cover the front," he said, gathering his courage. Their footfalls crunched over gravel, the tension palpable as the officer moved into position. Just before Jake could turn the corner, a sudden noise erupted from the back of the market, a shout, followed by the sound of glass breaking. "Go!" he yelled. The officers surged forward, instincts kicking in, but something held Jake back. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized a figure stumbling from within the rubble. It was a man, disheveled and panicked. Almost as if he had been running towards them, that a flash of recognition hit him. And in that fraction of a second, he realized it was someone he knew from the neighborhood. The man looked utterly lost, confusion twisting his features. "Help me," he shouted, arms raised in desperation. Just then, Jake's colleagues closed in around him. As they followed his gaze toward the man, a collective gasp rippled through the group, and Jake's heart plummeted. In that moment, the man he had just recognized wasn't just another citizen. He was someone who would crumple the very bridge Jake was trying to build with the community. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Would this break everything apart? Jake took a step forward. "Think fast, officers. How do we handle this?" The weight of their reactions suddenly felt overwhelming. In the chaos, he sensed change was right at their fingertips, but it could just as easily slip away. Could they turn this into a moment of trust, or would fear rule once more? The answers loomed like a heavy fog, and Jake understood he needed to act fast for everyone's sake. What would he choose, authority or empathy? Jake took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge through him. The man before them was not just a figure in distress. He was Tony, a local who had grown up in the neighborhood and was often seen around town, a father struggling to keep his family together after losing his job. The sight of him in this dire predicament was as seeing a friend caught in a storm, and Jake's heart ached for him. "Tony, it's Jake," he called out, stepping forward cautiously. The urgency of the situation sank in deeper, drawing the attention of every officer around him. "It's okay. We're here to help." The look of confusion on Tony's face twisted into one of panic. "No, you don't understand. I didn't mean to. I was desperate." He glanced back toward the market, eyes wide as if he expected something to leap out at him from the shadows. Jake gestured for his officers to hold back, their instincts itching for confrontation. "Let us take a breath," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. "Tony, can you tell me what happened? Why were you running?" I thought I could grab some food. My kids are hungry. I didn't have a choice." Tony's voice trembled, the desperation palpable. Jake felt a mix of anger and compassion rise within him. This was more than a simple break-in. It was a normal man entangled in an unsettling situation that screamed of systemic issues: hunger, unemployment, the struggle for survival. "We all make mistakes, Tony, but this isn't the way. Let's get you out of here. Can you walk towards me?" Tony shook his head frantically, glancing back to where the commotion had begun. "I can't go back. They'll think I'm a criminal." "We're not here to label you," Jake replied firmly. "Face the truth, and you'll start to see the light." He took a small step closer, the rest of the officers tense beside him. Time seemed to slow, every heartbeat echoing as he reached out a hand in an offering of safety. Miller stepped up, lowering his weapon slightly. "Tony, listen to Chief Jake. Let us work together to get you out of this." An officer shifted beside Jake, but he held a guiding hand up. This was a turning point, a chance to flip the story around. "I know you're scared. We're all scared. But trust us. You're not in this alone anymore." Tony's eyes darted, vulnerability creeping into his expression. Slowly, he took a hesitant step forward. Jake could feel the collective breath of his officers. They were still uncertain, but a shared understanding began to blossom. "Let us talk this through," Jake urged, speaking softly. "I promise, we'll go through everything together. Please just give me a chance." Just as Tony stepped closer, a sudden burst of noise erupted from behind the market, a crash. Then angry shouts filled the air. Officers exchanged worried glances, hearts racing again. "Stay behind me," Jake commanded, instinct kicking in. The situation could still spiral wildly. He had to think quickly. He had to protect Tony, but he also needed to ensure that the chaos didn't spiral out of control. As the sounds grew louder, a flurry of movement from the back drew all attention. Jake squared his shoulders, determination electrifying the air. "Stay focused. Whatever's coming, we face it together." What would emerge from the shadows? Jake felt the weight of the moment press down on him. This was not just about the conflict at hand. It was a moment that could either heal or fracture his fragile bond with the community he was trying to serve. In the uncertain chaos, could they weave a new story of connection instead of division? The shadows shifted, and Jake braced himself for whatever truth would step into the light next. Would it help him build trust or tear everything apart once again? Out of the darkness, a figure broke through, a man sprinting toward them, his face contorted in anger and a fear that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. He seemed to be fighting a battle, the kind that raged within a person looking for something, anything to hold on to. "Get away from him!" the newcomer shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. The crowd shifted, caught in a web of fear and confusion. Jake quickly recognized him as one of Tony's friends, a local who often hung around the neighborhood, usually smiling, but now a wild storm brewed in his eyes. "Calm down," Jake shouted, raising his hands. "We're not here to hurt him." The tension hung thick in the air. Tony's friend halted, uncertainty replacing his rage as he processed the scene. Jake, Tony, and the group of officers surrounding them. Jake could see the internal struggle played across his face, a war between loyalty and rational thought. "Tony didn't mean any harm," the man blurted, glancing back at him, worry flickering in his gaze. "He just needs help." "Then let us help him," Jake urged, voice steady and clear. "We're trying to do just that, but we need to keep this calm." Behind them, the curious crowd began to swell, whispers cascading like a wave. Eyes peered in from every angle, watching, waiting for something to break the tension, the chaos, or someone to shatter their close-knit community's fragile bond. Jake turned to Tony, his heart heavy with empathy. "You're not alone in this. I know it feels like the world is against you, but we're here for you." Tony's gaze fell, a storm of emotions cascading through him. "I just wanted to feed my kids," his voice wavered, and, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, he tightened his fists. "I didn't know what else to do." The crowd was growing restless, tension thickening with every passing second. Jake could sense the pulse of the community, their hopes and fears mingling dangerously close to chaos. "Look," Jake said, taking a deep breath and locking eyes with Tony's friend. "We can't let this spiral out of control. Let us work together, but we need to stay calm." At that moment, the accuser took a small step forward, hesitation creeping into his stance. "I see what is happening, but you gotta understand, Tony can't go to jail. He is a good man." "I agree." Jake nodded, and he deserves a chance to explain himself without fear. The way the man looked at him, a flicker of understanding made time seem to stand still. Maybe they could shift the narrative here. They could protect Tony, safeguard him during this moment of vulnerability. Suddenly, a voice broke through the tension. "What about his kids?" It was a woman from the crowd, her eyes shimmering with concern. They're waiting for him. Jake felt the tide shift. The collective energy of the crowd was beginning to transform, eyes widening with emotional understanding. They weren't just onlookers. They were witnesses to another man's struggle. "All right, let us get Tony safe. His kids need him," Jake affirmed, sensing the moment of connection snapping into place. "And we'll make sure you're seen as a father, not a criminal." Tony glanced at Jake, the doubt and fear in his eyes giving way to a smidgen of hope. "You do that?" A loud crash from behind the market brought everyone's focus back. The commotion that had faded momentarily roared to life again, and Jake felt the bubble of unity around them burst. "Whatever that is, we can face it together," he said, his voice rising over the din. But as the noise intensified, he couldn't shake a feeling the danger was only just beginning. What lurked behind the chaos? And would they all emerge from this trial transformed? Or would the truth fracture the fragile bonds they had barely formed? The sound of shattering glass echoed through the air, pulling everyone's attention toward the back of the market. Jake's heart raced as he turned to see figures darting in and out of the shadows, the faint light illuminating wild movements. Fear gripped the crowd. Faces paled, eyes widened, and the atmosphere thickened with uncertainty. "Stay back," one of the officers shouted, his voice barely cutting through the rising panic. It was a call to arms, but nobody moved. They were frozen, torn between their instinct to run and the need to protect their own. Tony clutched Jake's arm, his desperation palpable. "What is happening? Is this about me? I can't go to jail. I can't leave my kids." Jake's mind raced. He needed to keep everyone focused, keep them safe. "We're not going to let anything happen to you," he promised Tony, but even he wasn't so sure anymore. The crowd began to shift nervously, whispers spiraling. "Are they coming for him?" someone murmured, and Jake felt the weight of those words hang heavily. He understood their fear. The fear of losing one of their own was palpable. A loud bang resonated as another object fell. The officers positioned themselves instinctively, eyes scanning for threats. "Everyone stay calm," one officer yelled as they thrust a hand forward, another readying his weapon. Then, in a split second, something snapped. Chaos erupted. The figures, previously lurking in shadows, began to charge toward the crowd, and instinctively, the people surged back, forming a tight knot of humanity. "Jake!" Tony's voice trembled, his grip tightening like a vice. "What do we do?" "Stay close to me," Jake replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Stay together." At that moment, the stirring crowd morphed into a sea of uncertainty, fear spreading like wildfire. The tightness in Jake's chest felt suffocating. He glanced around, searching for understanding or direction amid the tumult. From a market came a shout from a distance, and Jake turned to see a few more officers arriving from the alleyway, their uniforms sharp against the chaos. The sound of sirens began to wail, adding a chilling note to the confusion. "Why are there more officers?" Tony's friend whispered, looking bewildered. The tension clawed at Jake's throat. They must be responding to the noise, or worse. And then the impossible happened. From the throng of rushing figures emerged a familiar face, one he hadn't seen in years. It was Chief Harris, the very man they had respected, the man they had turned to for leadership. "Stop!" Chief Harris commanded, his voice slicing through the noise as he raised his hands. "Hold your position." The crowd stilled for a moment, a wave of confusion washing over them as realization hit. The officers glanced at each other, uncertainty mirrored in their eyes. "Chief," one of them questioned, stepping forward. "What in the world is going on?" Jake whispered under his breath, his heart pounding in disbelief. Was this chaos a challenge to the community, or something more? And then, as swift as a lightning bolt, a new realization struck Jake. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a test of reckoning that could either forge a stronger bond between them or rip them apart forever. Every soul there was holding their breath, teetering on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Would they defy the chief's order for Tony, or would they step back, choosing the safety of their own lives over standing up for a fellow man? The stakes had never felt so dangerously high. The moment felt charged, electric, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. What would their choice be when faced with the truth? The crowd hung in silence, tension thick as smoke, and Jake felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Questions buzzed unspoken in the air. Who was right? Who was wrong? Did they trust Chief Harris? Or was this a betrayal of everything they stood for? Stay back. The officers commanded again, the authority of their posturing unmistakable. But Chief Harris stood firm, his eyes scanning the crowd like a lighthouse in a storm. He was searching for something recognition, perhaps. "Chief, what is happening?" Someone from the crowd finally broke the silence, their voice trembling with fear. Harris slowly lowered his hands, trying to express calm. "Listen, there's been a misunderstanding." His gaze flickered to Tony, knowing there was a risk inherent in everything now hanging in the balance. "Nobody's here to hurt anyone. How can we trust you?" Jake interjected, stepping forward. Every instinct told him to back down, to shield Tony from whatever storm was brewing. Yet he stood tall. "You're saying this isn't about him?" "For now." Chief Harris's voice bore the heavy weight of authority, but Jake could see a flicker of something else in his eyes. A vulnerability that didn't belong alongside the uniform. "Please, everyone, let's sort this out without fear." Around him, people began whispering anxiously. Some gripped each other's arms, while others exchanged cautious glances as they grappled with a choice that could define everything. Tony was shaking now, the reality of his situation flooding over him. "What do you mean?" he called out, panic rising in his voice. "Am I going to jail? Are these people really here for me?" "No," Chief Harris replied sharply, catching himself in the grip of the moment. The audience hesitated at the urgency in his tone. "There's a larger problem at play. We need to protect each other, not turn against one another." "What is happening outside the market?" A voice called from the periphery. "Hold your ground," an officer shouted, but Jake could see the hesitation in their eyes as they sensed the crowd turning from frantic to resolute. Jake's heart raced. People began to look at one another, searching for answers. "This is more than just about you, Tony. This is about everyone," Jake said, his voice steady even as adrenaline coursed through him. "Do we fight for what's right here, or do we let fear decide for us?" He felt a spark of hope as he looked around. Slowly, he began to lower, fists loosened. They were on the brink together. But would it be enough? "I will vouch for him." Another voice piped up from deep in the crowd. "He is not a criminal. He is a father." "Exactly," someone else echoed. "This isn't right." The crowd began to swell, voices overlapping. They were feeding off each other's courage. A palpable energy shifted among them, and Jake felt himself swept into it. "Enough." Chief Harris broke through the clamor, his voice a booming anchor. "I need to know who's with me. We're facing a threat that could tear us apart if we don't stand together." "But what is really going on?" Jake pressed, heart racing. "Time is running out," Chief Harris said, urgency flickering in his eyes. "I can't explain it all right now, but something bigger is at stake more than just Tony's fate." Suddenly, the shouts in the distance grew louder. The chaos outside the market seemed to reach a fever pitch, the sirens blaring a warning they couldn't ignore any longer. Jake's got twisted as he realized they were out of time. "What do we do now?" he asked, desperation creeping in. Chief Harris glanced at the officers. "We prepare to stand together, or we risk losing everything we've fought to keep." The weight of those words settled over the crowd. It was a call to arms, a declaration that immense change could be at hand if they dared to answer the call. As the figures grew more defined in the shadows, a chilling realization dawned on Jake. Would they unify, or would the fear fracture them completely? The moment of truth was upon them, and they had to choose. The crowd swayed with anxiety, the air crackling with tension as everyone waited for a decision, a lead. Jake felt the pulse of uncertainty in his veins, a nagging fear that what came next could irreparably change everything they knew. "Listen to me." Chief Harris raised his voice, desperate to be the anchor everyone needed. "We need to unite now. The chaos outside is not just noise. It's a signal that something's coming. We can't be divided while facing this threat. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Hope wobbled uncertainly alongside doubt. Was this really a misunderstanding or a veiled betrayal? Jake held on to Tony's arm, grounding them both. Tony's face was pale, but determination flickered behind his eyes. He squeezed Jake's hand, a silent acknowledgement that they were all in this together. "Chief Harris, what danger are you talking about?" A mother from the crowd yelled, her voice breaking through the nervous hum. "If it's about us, our families it is," Harris interrupted, glancing at the officers flanking him. "There are changes happening, and they are targeting this community. We are in their sights. Why should we believe you?" Someone shot back. "You were the one who brought the police here." Harris's face tightened, but Jake saw the flicker of pain in his eyes, a reminder that even leaders are human. "You think I want to be here like this? That I enjoy facing you? But I'm new here, and the old allegiances are crumbling. The ones we trusted are not who they appear to be." Shouts rang out, a cacophony of voices questioning trust, loyalty, and safety. Then, from the chaos, Jake felt a shift in the crowd. People began to step forward, as if sensing an awakening within them. Together, Jake shouted, his voice piercing the tumult. "It's our choice. We can't let fear or doubt tear us apart. This is our home. If they want to divide us, we can't let that happen. We have to show them we're not going to back down." Murmurs turned to shouts of agreement. Faces brightened with understanding, fists raised. Not just for Tony, but for all that was at stake. It wasn't long before voices rallied together, echoing Jake's sentiments. "Stand with us, Chief," one man bellowed, and the sound cascaded through the crowd, a wave of unity building momentum. Then, something shifted again. As they rallied behind Harris, the tone of the gathering began to morph from desperation to determination. But even as tensions eased slightly, a shadow passed over the crowd. Gazes turned toward the chaotic street, where figures approached through the storm of uncertainty. Jake's heart raced as he noticed the distinctive dark uniforms, a different police emblem. Panic flickered in the crowd again. "What we do now?" Someone whispered, worry creeping back as fear replaced the initial surge of courage. "They're coming," whispered Tony, his voice barely audible, yet full of dread. "What's our next move? Do we fight?" A heavy silence fell as everyone turned to Chief Harris, their collective hope resting on the man in front of them. The moment loomed large. The choice lay at their feet. Then the chief stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes blazing with an intensity Jake hadn't seen before. "This is where we make our stand. We face them together, or we let them tear us apart. Choose." Sweat dripped from Jake's brow as his heart thudded in his chest. Would they fight? Would they dare to stand? The reality hit him hard. This wasn't just about protecting Tony anymore. It was about survival, and at the very core of their community, the energy surged, the tension crackled, and they had to decide. But in that moment, Jake noticed something he hadn't before. A flicker of recognition on Harris's face, as if he saw something among the approaching officers that made him hesitate. "Let's hope it's not too late," Jake thought, breath hitching in his throat. And just as the words formed, those approaching figures stepped into the light of the market, revealing a face that sent chills down his spine. "Wait, that can't be," he muttered as dread washed over him. What did Chief Harris see that made him pause? Who were the figures really? Jake's dread turned to confusion as the pieces began to shift beneath him, and he realized the truth may carry more weight than he ever expected. The crowd stood frozen, the weight of Jake's own confusion echoing around him. He felt as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a truth more complex than any he had faced before. As the figures stepped into the light, Jake's heart raced. It was clear now these weren't just officers. Each face held a story, a contradiction reflecting the community he called home. "Chief Harris," Jake whispered, an urgent plea in his voice. "What do they want?" But the question hung unanswered, suspended in the air, heavy with expectation. The imposing figures emerged, different townspeople in blue uniforms that seemed so familiar, yet so frightening at the same time. Jake's stomach twisted as he recognized them. They were once friends, now standing with arms crossed, eyes narrowed in an unfamiliar stance. They were the ones he'd seen throughout his life, and yet here they were, standing against them. "Don't panic," Chief Harris commanded, his authoritative voice breaking through the tension. "These are not the enemies. They're just misguided." But as the words left his mouth, uncertainty flickered across the crowd, mingling with fear and doubt. "Misguided?" Someone shouted from the back, voice dripping with sarcasm. "They're turning against us, no different from the others." In that moment of tension, Jake felt the collective heartbeat of the crowd. They were all at crossroads. He caught Tony's vulnerability still lingered there, a pleading for safety, for assurance. "Tony," Jake said, his voice soft but firm, "we need to show them that we're stronger together, not divided. Let's not add to the problems. Let us prove we can find a way through this." In a surprising twist, as Jake put out a hand to invite Tony forward, other community members stepped up, families, friends. They gathered around him, creating a circle of strength. "We're not going to let fear divide us anymore," Jake called out, his voice rising over the murmurs, feeling the warmth of their unity. Maybe it was the spark of hope in his words, or the sheer intensity of the moment. But one by one, the officers in the opposing line began to lower their arms. Jake could see cracks forming in their demeanor, the tension that had once consumed everyone beginning to ebb. "Listen," Jake spoke again as he stepped forward, cradling the gravity of the moment. "We're here for one thing, for each other. We're not going to let our history dictate our future. That's the change we've started, and it should include everyone." With those words, something broke free. Families began to speak, bridging gaps between community members and officers alike. "We've seen you," someone shouted. "We know you're with us." Tears started to swell in Jake's eyes as emotions erupted. Faces softened, genuine concern flooding in, almost as if the realization swept over them that they were all part of the solution, not just the problem. This was a moment of reckoning, a chance to forge a new path. Then Chief Harris stepped forward, recognition flooding his face. "You're right, Jake. This division is not where the strength lies. It's in the coming together." As his voice echoed through the air, a ripple of agreement surged through the crowd. The tension that once felt suffocating began to dissolve into something lighter, a shared understanding. Then, from the deeper ranks of the emerging crowd, the officer Jake recognized as his childhood friend stepped forward. "I forgot who we were, Jake. We've been so wrapped up in what we thought we had to do that we lost sight of what we really stand for." The floodgates opened then. Conversations replaced hostility, familiarity rekindled over shared experiences. The community stood shoulder to shoulder, a tapestry of unity wrapping around each member. Jake felt a warmth growing in his chest, a happiness blooming that began to wash away the fear. "We're in this together," he exclaimed, looking around at the faces filled with hope. "And if we can hold on to that, we can build something beautiful." The officers, Jake, and even Tony, all those whose lives intertwined in a web of neighborly history, finally began to breathe. Understanding transformed the air around them, the once-faced doubts replaced with a collective vow to support one another. As the sun set on that chaotic day, casting brilliant shades of orange and purple across the horizon, Jake watched as the community began to embrace change. Hope thrummed in the air, a tangible promise that whispered it was right and good to extend hands, to uplift, and ultimately transform. In the waning light, Jake turned to Chief Harris. "This is our moment," he said, voice laden with determination. "Together, we're going to redefine what it means to serve this community. Let us get started one day at a time." And maybe that was how real change would begin. As the shadows of doubt lifted, the crowd erupted with renewed purpose, resonating with energy. They became the heartbeat of a town ready for tomorrow. Now, as we close the curtain on this story, I urge you, you need to subscribe now to not miss the next incredible chapter of transformation. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and keep the stories coming. Comment below with your thoughts on this amazing ending. Your reactions matter. And don't wait, not even one more second, to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this inspiring change. This is the moment to show your support. Let's build this community together.